Vienna, 1907. Just as the bells of St. Stephen's Cathedral tolled noon over the snow-dusted rooftops of the Hofburg Palace, a maid with quiet eyes and a softer voice slipped through the servants' corridor of the imperial residence, her hands clasped around a silver tray. Her name was Elira, and she did not speak unless spoken to. Most of the court barely knew her name, only that she was punctual and precise, and that the linens she folded bore not a single crease. She had worked in the imperial household since she was 16, when her mother died of fever and left her with no dowry and no choice. Today, she carried tea to the Archduchess's antechamber, a task she'd done every day for 3 years. But today was different, because the Archduchess's nephew, Prince Wellesley Hartmann, had returned from Dalmatia, and the entire court had been turned on its head. He was 23, unmarried, and heir to the imperial line through his mother's side. Rumors said he'd fought in the border skirmishes along the Adriatic, that he'd survived a duel at dawn over a matter of honor, that he'd gone months without speaking to anyone but his horse. The ladies of court fluttered around him like moths to a flame. But Elira, with her apron stiff and her hair pinned back in careful coils, kept her head down, until the door opened, and there he was. He stood beside the window, tall and lean in a navy officer's coat lined with sable. Snow clung to his boots. His gaze was fixed on the gardens below, where the statues wore white caps and the trees were bare as bone. She set the tray down without a word. "Wait," he said, turning. Elira froze. Prince Wellesley looked at her directly. "You're not the usual girl." "I'm begging your pardon, sir," she said, barely above a whisper. "Greta took ill. I was sent instead." He stepped forward. "What's your name?" She lowered her eyes. "Elira. Elira," he repeated, as if testing it on his tongue. "You speak very softly." "I speak when necessary, Your Highness." He tilted his head. "And when it's not?" "I do not." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, not amusement, but something else. Interest, perhaps, or curiosity. "You may go," he said. She curtsied and turned to leave, but he added, "Thank you." The words followed her like warmth against her back. No one thanked maids. Certainly not princes. The next day, he asked for tea again. And the day after that. Always at noon. Always alone. By the 4th day, she found a folded note beneath the teacup. Her name was written in careful script. "You speak softly, but I hear you." She didn't answer. She couldn't. It was madness, dangerous and impossible. A maid could not love a prince. And yet, when she returned the next day, he looked up from his seat and asked, "Would you sit a moment?" "I cannot. I'm not permitted." "I give you permission." "That's not how it works." He stood and moved toward the window. "I fought a duel last autumn. A boy from a noble family insulted one of my men, called him a peasant dog. I challenged him. He shot first, missed. I did not." Elira's breath caught. "You killed him." "I wounded him. But the court cared more for his bloodline than his behavior. I was sent away for a time, to reflect." "Was it worth it?" she asked, before she could stop herself. He turned to her. "Yes." Their eyes held, just for a second. Then she curtsied again and left without another word. Over the next week, they spoke never long, never loud. She told him of the village she came from, nestled at the foot of the Alps. He told her of wind in the sails of a warship off the Dalmatian coast. They never called it what it was becoming. But the silence between them grew heavier each day, filled with things neither dared say. It was in the old library, empty now, save for dust and forgotten maps, that he reached for her hand. "Your hands are cold," he said. "You shouldn't touch me." "I know, but I wanted to." She didn't pull away. Later, she would remember the way his thumb brushed her knuckles, gloved but trembling. But a maid had no right to dream. The Empress's ladies were already whispering, and the head steward had warned her, once, not to draw attention. If they were caught, she would be dismissed without reference. He would be forced to marry a duchess from Prague. Still, she returned. Every day? Until one morning, the head steward cornered her in the corridor. "You are to report to the kitchens. From now on, you will not deliver to the prince's chambers." Her heart dropped. "Have I done something wrong?" His eyes narrowed. "You've been seen. That's enough." That night, she stood in the frost-covered courtyard behind the scullery, tears frozen on her cheeks. "Why are you out here?" came a familiar voice. She turned. Wellesley stood in the shadow of the stone arch, his coat flung over his shoulders, his hair unkempt. "I wasn't allowed to see you," she said. "I know. I'm sorry. They'll dismiss me." "They won't," he said, stepping closer. "Because you're not going back to the lower halls." She stared. "What are you saying?" "I've asked my aunt to name you my private tutor in English, so you'll have access to the upper libraries. She owes me after what happened in Dalmatia. You'll be paid double." "I'm not a tutor." "You read perfectly. You speak well. That's enough." She wanted to say no. She wanted to walk away. But his eyes held hers. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "Because you dared to see me before I was a prince. And I want to keep being seen." The snow fell harder around them. She reached for his hand, just briefly, and he held it tight. "Then I'll come," she whispered. Neither of them noticed the figure watching from the upper window, face pale with fury and fingers clenched in lace and rubies. The Archduchess would not be so easily crossed. The snow had melted into gray slush by the time Elira stepped through the side entrance of the Hofburg's north wing, her boots soaked through and her gloves damp from the morning's walk. She no longer wore the apron and linen cap of the lower household. Her new post in English tutor on paper, though everyone knew it was a title granted by favor, required discreet dignity. Plain wool skirts now replaced her worn uniform, and she carried a slim leather satchel lined with grammar texts and a borrowed copy of Julius Caesar she had yet to open. The upper corridors echoed differently than those below. No clatter of pots or shouted orders, just the hush of footmen, the creak of oil-polished wood, and the rustle of brocade gowns brushing parquet floors. She walked with measured steps, careful not to meet the eyes of the noble women who passed her, some of whom narrowed their gazes with the cool contempt of those trained to recognize misstep. Wellesley was waiting in the northwest study, a neglected room whose windows overlooked the stables and the narrow lane where deliveries arrived. He had chosen it deliberately quiet, out of sight, away from the scrutiny of his aunt's circle. No portraits of past emperors glared down from the walls here. Only shelves of disused books and a writing desk with a chipped inkwell. "You're late," he said, but his voice held no edge. "A footman insisted on inspecting my satchel," she replied, setting it down. He didn't like the look of the binding. Wellesley leafed through a volume of naval charts, closing it with a dull thud. "They're watching, then. They know I don't belong in this wing." "You belong here," he said, not looking at her. She moved to the desk, pulling out a folded sheet of exercises she had copied the night before. "You asked for instruction. We should begin. I didn't request Latin. You said you wanted to read your dispatches without translation." He raised a brow. "You mean father's letters. You didn't say I couldn't be thorough." He grinned wry and fleeting and sat beside her. "Fine. Teach me." They worked in careful silence for a time, the scratch of the quill filling the stillness between them. She corrected his syntax. He asked questions that revealed more curiosity than formality. Only once did their hands brush, reaching for the same text. Neither spoke of it. After the lesson, Wellesley leaned back in his chair and glanced toward the shuttered window. "My cousin will be announced as engaged by Easter," he said. "To whom?" "Countess von Brixen. Her father has 4 estates and a seat in the Reichsrat." Elira gathered the exercise sheets. "Then your aunt's expectations will be satisfied. She's already chosen mine as well. A baron's daughter from Salzburg. I've never met her." Elira didn't answer. "You think I'll go through with it?" he asked. "I think you have no choice." "I always have a choice. Even when it costs me." She turned to face him. "And who bears that cost, Your Highness?" "You do," he said plainly. The words settled between them, unadorned and undeniable. That evening, she found a folded scrap inside her satchel. Not in his hand, but in a servant's hurried script. "The Archduchess has asked for your character to be reviewed. Take care. She believes you carry influence." Elira burned the note in the hearth of the laundry quarters, watching it curl into ash among the embers. The next day, she arrived earlier than usual. Wellesley stood by the window again, but this time he was without his coat, dressed only in his shirt and waistcoat, sleeves rolled to the elbow. He was looking at a single sheet of parchment, thumb pressed against the seal. "My father wants me posted to Trieste," he said without looking up, "to oversee naval readiness. He means to exile me quietly. You've barely returned. He's afraid I'll make a spectacle." She stepped closer. "Will you go? If I refuse, he'll cut my allowance and threaten my commission." If I go, I lose you. You don't have me. He turned. Don't I? Elira swallowed. Not in any way that matters here. It matters to me. She looked away. That's not enough. I could marry you, Wellesley said, sudden and low. Her head snapped toward him. I could petition the emperor. It's been done rarely, but precedent exists. I could renounce my inheritance, accept a lesser title. We could go to Graz, or even Zurich. There are paths. You would give up your name? She said, voice steady, though her hands tightened around the satchel strap. I would give up anything that asks me to live without you. A long pause passed between them. You don't know the weight of that, she said finally. I know I've never spoken with anyone the way I speak with you. I know you see the world clearly, and I want to be a man worthy of that gaze. You're not ready. Then help me be. Outside, bells rang for terce. Elira stepped forward, close enough to smell parchment and ink and the faintest trace of bay rum. If you leave, she said, leave with a plan. Not a promise. I will. She reached for his hand, just once, and this time it was she who held it tight. Then she turned and left, leaving only the scent of winter air and the soft weight of her vow behind her. March brought thaw and wind to Vienna, and with it, the quiet rearrangement of court routines. The Archduchess's household began preparing for the Easter season, which meant full dress assemblies, visiting dignitaries, and the return of certain nobles from their winter estates. Elira was summoned less frequently, now once or twice a week, to the Northwest study and never at consistent times, a precaution Wellesley insisted on after learning that the Archduchess had changed her personal secretary. On a Friday afternoon thick with low cloud and the scent of wet stone, Elira arrived at the study to find the windows open and a travel case on the floor. You're leaving, she said, not as a question. I leave for Trieste tomorrow, Wellesley replied, folding a wool tunic and placing it carefully into the case. I'll serve as naval attaché to the Southern Command. It's a ceremonial post, mostly, but it keeps me visible. Elira walked to the desk, her chin raised slightly to avoid showing the heaviness in her chest. You said you would have a plan. I do. He opened a drawer and drew out a thin folder, bound with green ribbon. Petition of modification of title and assignment of private estate, he read aloud. It's addressed to the emperor. Co-signed by my uncle in the foreign ministry. Elira's fingers tightened around the edge of the desk. If it's approved, Wellesley continued, I'll be removed from the line of succession, granted custodianship of an estate near Lake Attersee, and permitted to marry without dynastic restriction. You would no longer be a prince. I would still be Wellesley, and I would be free to choose you. She stepped back from the desk, folding her arms. That kind of petition takes months to process. What happens in the meantime? I serve, I wait, I keep my name quiet. You remain here. No letters. No visits. Not until I return with a seal. Silence pressed between them, filled only by the distant shout of a stable hand and the roll of wagon wheels over cobblestone. You expect me to wait unseen, she said at last. I expect you to be safer that way. Elira looked down at her hands. I've lived my whole life being careful. I won't go back to being invisible. I'm not asking you to hide, he said, stepping forward. I'm asking you to endure. Just for a little longer. She met his eyes. I'll wait, but not for your petition. I'll wait for you to return as a man who knows what kind of world he wants to build. Wellesley nodded slowly. Then I'll become that man. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small velvet pouch. Inside was a brooch filigree brass, shaped like a swallow in flight. No jewels, only a single carved garnet for the eye. My mother gave this to my nurse when I was born. She said it was to be returned to me when I found someone who looked at me with truth. Elira took the brooch, her fingers brushing his. You'll know I haven't forgotten, he said, if you wear it when I come back. Then he lifted her hand and pressed it to his lips, nothing overt, nothing reckless, just a still, reverent gesture that held more weight than any vow. The next morning, he was gone. Spring passed in gusts and silken banners. Elira returned to her duties, though now she worked under the supervision of a new steward who assigned her to the record archives within the palace library. It was a quieter post, and less visible. She did not ask questions. In May, as the city prepared for Corpus Christi, rumors spread of unrest in the Balkans. The Archduchess began hosting long dinners with senior military officials, and Elira once glimpsed a dispatch rider in the corridor outside the War Office, his boots caked with coastal sand. By midsummer, Elira had learned to walk past the portraits of emperors without flinching, to carry herself with deliberate modesty, and to speak to no one unless necessary. But each morning, when she dressed, she fastened the swallow brooch at her collarbone, just beneath the fold of her shawl. It was late August when the palace gates were thrown open for the imperial summer concert. Foreign envoys and favored families were invited to the grand garden, where Strauss waltzes floated through lantern-lit hedges and champagne was served from silver trays. Elira was assigned to the outer terrace, tasked with ensuring the musicians' pages were kept dry and in order. She did not expect to see him there. But as the orchestra paused between pieces and the crowd turned toward the Empress's box for the next toast, she felt a presence at her side. "Elira," said a voice low and unmistakable. She turned. Wellesley stood beside her, no longer in naval garb, but in a plain evening coat marked only with a modest insignia, a swallow embroidered in silver thread at the cuff. "I thought you might not come back. I said I would return with the seal." He held out the folded parchment, now bearing a red wax stamp pressed with the Emperor's crest. Her hands shook as she took it. "I am now Wellesley von Attersee, holder of an independent estate. No heirs, no obligations. Free to choose my own household." Elira stared at the paper, then up at him. "I have a housekeeper already," he said gently, "but I'm missing a mistress of the estate, and I've already written the invitation." She gave him a long, searching look, then reached for the brooch at her collar and fastened it to the outside of her shawl. "You're not invisible," he said. "You never were." Then he offered his hand, not hidden, not in secret, but openly, before the gathered crowd and flickering lanterns. And she took it. The train to Salzkammergut arrived just before dusk, its wheels sighing against the track as steam curled into the orange-lit sky. Elira stepped onto the quiet platform, the hem of her coat brushing against the polished leather of her boots. She carried only one trunk, and even that had felt excessive. The brooch rested above her collarbone, fastened without flourish. No one at the station seemed to notice her, except for the coachman holding a card bearing the name von Attersee. She'd never traveled west of Linz before. The hills here sloped softer than the jagged alpine ridges of her childhood, and the air smelled of pine bark and wood smoke. As the carriage turned through the forest roads, she pressed her palm against the window pane and watched the lake appear still and dark as polished slate, its shoreline dotted with the flicker of lanterns. The estate came into view gradually, a manor of pale stone and deep eaves, flanked by linden trees and a modest chapel. A single window on the upper floor was lit. The rest of the house stood quiet, waiting. Wellesley met her at the steps. The last time she had seen him, his eyes had been fevered with purpose. Now they held something steadier. "You came," he said. "I told you I would." He reached for her hand, not to lift or guide it, just to hold it, briefly. The coachman excused himself with a nod and disappeared toward the stables. Inside, the manor smelled faintly of oil, soap, and rosemary. The floors glowed with recent polish, and white sheets still covered the unused furniture. "The staff is small," Wellesley said as they walked, his voice lowered to match the hush of the hall. "A cook, a groundsman, and a local woman who comes twice a week to help with linens. I thought we could decide the rest together." "You've lived alone here?" "Only since last month. Before that, it sat empty for years, my grandfather's hunting lodge, originally." They stopped outside a pair of carved oak doors. He hesitated, then opened them. The room was spare but warm. A fireplace already kindled, a tall bookshelf half filled, and a table laid for two. A bowl of autumn pears rested at the center, their skins dappled gold. Elira looked around, then back at him. "You set this yourself? You once told me I should learn to do things without help. I also told you not to make promises lightly. I didn't." She crossed to the hearth and held her hands near the flames. "I've never lived in a house with its own name before," she said. Wellesley poured a measure of wine into 2 glasses and set one beside her. "What else haven't you done?" She didn't answer at once. Then, quietly, "I've never been asked what kind of life I want." He drew closer. "What do you want?" "To wake without dread," she said, not looking at him. "To learn things that weren't meant for me. To stop being cautious every moment I breathe." He watched her for a long time before speaking. Then let this be your house as much as mine. Not as a guest, not under favor, as a name on the deed. She turned. You would give me that. I already have. The papers are with the notary in Gmunden. Your name is written beside mine. She sat slowly, her hands resting in her lap. Is this what you meant by changing your world? She asked. No, he said. That was only the beginning. They dined simply bread, trout with lemon, and soft cheese wrapped in leaves. He poured no second glass, and she did not ask for one. They spoke of the orchard behind the house, the road that led to the village, and the old piano in the west parlor that had not been tuned in over a decade. Later, he led her through the corridor to a small room with a bay window and a writing desk. I thought this might suit you, he said, for reading, or whatever else you choose. She stepped inside. The curtains had been tied back with ribbon, and a vase of dried lavender sat near the sill. I don't know what to say, she murmured. Then don't, he said gently. Just stay. She turned toward him, her eyes steady. I will. He reached up and brushed a stray curl behind her ear, his fingers lingering just above her cheek. Then, slowly, he leaned forward and touched his forehead to hers. No one watched. No one intruded. The manor held its breath around them. Outside, the lake turned silver under the rising moon, and the wind carried down from the hills, clean and quiet. Inside, they stood still not as a prince and a maid, but as two people who had crossed the long road from silence to certainty and found peace waiting.